The Alabama Booksmith presents Author Spotlight. Because every book in our store is signed, our Wall of Fame displays a breathtaking array of writers and signatures. Close-up shots reveal giants of literature, acclaimed historians, stars of stage and screen, our nation's leaders, famous sports heroes, and thousands of other esteemed authors. Today's Wall of Fame guest is John Archibald, who will discuss his new book, Shaking the Gates of Hell. And here's John Archibald with our host, Jake Reese.
Welcome, John Archibald.
Well, thank you for having me here.
And welcome to our viewers. We appreciate your taking time from a whirlwind schedule before returning to Harvard as a
Neiman Fellow.
Our audience is in for a treat as they receive this personal preview of what we think is one of the blockbuster books of 2021.
Well, thank you. I hope you're right.
Well, no question. Let me note that we're fortunate at this joint that we shelve our books by author. Otherwise, we'd have a heck of a time deciding if this powerful treasure belongs in memoir, history, philosophy, race, or, and please forgive me, but because of so many clever asides, it would rank quite high if we had a humor section.
Well, thank you. You know, I'm glad to hear you say that because I didn't know where it would be categorized myself. I have no idea. They want to call it a memoir. Maybe half of it's a memoir, but it's a search.
I didn't mean to insult a Pulitzer Prize winner who has spent years researching and writing a serious, honest look at the past and the present, but there's several spots in your book that I just laughed out loud.
Well, I hope so. I mean, there's some heavy things. So,
oh boy.
And my personal philosophy is, if you're going to bring heavy things, you need to bring some light ones too.
Well, you did a great balance. We'll talk about the humor in a bit, but first, would you give our audience an understanding of the Archibald family tree?
Wow, the Archibald family tree. There are Methodist preachers on the Archibald family tree all the way back to before Methodism, really, before it got to America. So preachers every generation back to before the Revolutionary War. That stops here, by the way.
You didn't even dabble?
No, well, I did dabble one time, but I think that was more of a, I came to believe that was more of an acid flashback than it was anything else. But I realized I would do more harm than good, and so that ended there. But there are people who say I got a pretty big pulpit anyway, so
well said. I think those people are correct. And speaking of your family tree, your ancestors, I got a kick out of your mention of a great uncle who went to college with Aaron Burr, and
that's right.
I love the aside. Would you share what you put in the book?
that he must have gotten along well with him because he didn't get shot. Something like that. Yeah, he was my favorite relative of all. I was really disappointed when I was researching this book because I had always thought that he's Robert Archibald. I always thought that Robert Archibald was my great grandfather. But then in researching the book, I found out that he would have been a great uncle. But he had I loved him because he was a preacher, but he got kicked out of the church for, he was a Presbyterian church at the time, so he got kicked out for preaching humanist doctrine and drinking to excess. So I figured,
in that order?
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe I fell out of that tree instead of this one. So
Oh,
never know.
boy. Well, you were born right outside of Birmingham, Alabama, in the most turbulent year of the civil rights movement. When you were 1 day old, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth led marches on a protest to City Hall. A week later, 8 local clergy published a message in the Birmingham News that led to Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from the Birmingham jail, which would become a major influence in your life. Will you give us a few lines from that famous document that may be part of the genesis for this book?
Oh yeah, oh absolutely, and one of my favorite documents ever. I'm in Birmingham because injustice is here. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And there are just lines throughout that get to me. We're bound in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And it's the whole document. I mean, it's on its, it's a rebuke to preachers who did not use their sermons to say what needed to be said at one of the most critical moments in history. And my father was a preacher, of course, outside Birmingham, Alabama, at this particular moment in time. And so I always, I love my dad. My dad's a great man. In my eye, he was everything. And so I always presumed, which for a journalist is not a good thing, that he was doing the right thing, because he taught me everything that I believe today. And so I never really asked him, I never really ever said, what were you saying from the pulpit? Until he died, and I found every sermon he ever gave in a file cabinet that was left to me in my basement.
And that, in my mind, is one of the absolute major reasons this book worked. It's phenomenal that you had access to every sermon your dad preached.
Dated, noted, notated.
And you shared so much with your readers. And while most of those texts were what we would expect from a Methodist preacher of the day, some of the material accounts for my earlier reference to humor. I have stolen and already used your dad's quote from Tallulah Bankhead. Will you set the stage and give our audience that one-liner?
Well, she was visiting an English noble person, or a woman of great stature in England, and Tallulah had a line for everything. But during this visit, the woman's son was running around sort of wild, I believe, and the English woman said, I just don't know what to make of him. And she said, how about a nice rug?
What a great line. And remember,
I've got more Tallulah stories if you want them.
Oh, well, let's talk. That's great. Throughout the book, your readers can feel your love and admiration for your dad, along with what may be considered by some as disappointment. While we show a picture on the screen of you and your dad together, would you reminisce just a little bit about fishing with your dad and his watching you practice football, and the incident where he cleaned the walls at your sister's school.
Well, Dad was he loved nature more than anything, and so we would go fishing. He liked to fly fish from a canoe, which is not like fly fishing like Howell Rains or from a river runs through it, which requires a little more skill. But we would paddle around in the silence of the lake on the foggy mornings before it got light, and he would mainly just paddle me around because he liked to fish, but he liked to watch us fish more. He liked it because when you're fly fishing on a lake, you can't miss it when the fish hits. I mean, it comes up through the water, and it just breaks the silence in its majesty. And he would get so tickled about that he could hardly stand it. But it was not without pain for him, because when he first was teaching me how to do it, you fly fish, you whip, and I whipped that thing, and he had a bald spot in the back of his head right here, and that fly hit him in the head right here, and we could not get it out. So, but instead of breaking the trip up, he just cut the line, and so he spent the rest of that day with a hook in his head until we got home. I'm not sure how he ever got it out, but I'm sure my mom had something to do with it. But I forgot the second part of the question.
He would watch you practice football.
Oh yeah, I played football at Banks High School. David Cutcliffe was the coach. He's a coach at Duke now, which was a fun time. He was the chaplain for the team, and as part of his responsibilities, also drove the church bus to take the football team to the games, which was harrowing, especially when we played like Mountain Brook, and there were a lot of winding roads down there, and that bus would be careening down there, and everybody in that bus thought they were going to die. But I think it was his way of getting them to pray a little bit, because I hope there was some reason for it.
And finally, the incident which you put in the book, where he was cleaning the walls in the restroom.
He was always there for us, all of us, and all of us children. Being preacher's kids, we had a tendency to take our role as preacher's kids seriously and cause as much trouble as we possibly could. But he found out that that somebody had written my sister's name or number or whatever, something. I don't know what was on the wall, on the bathroom wall at her school, and he just took matters into his own hands and immediately marched down the school with a towel and some cleaner, and just went in there and cleaned it off instead of going. And that was sort of his way. When something needs to be done, you do it, which is why you talked about great love and great disappointment, which is another line from Martin Luther King's letter, where there's great love, there's great disappointment. And I mean, where there's great disappointment, there has to be great love where there's great disappointment. So yeah, he was some kind of guy.
As all readers of that book will glean, one of my favorite musings while digesting the totality of this brilliant work was to go back and forth between then and now. And another issue that stuck with me was Bull Connor lost an election and refused to leave office. Share that little story.
Well, I mean, that I hadn't really thought about that in the context of today until today. But yeah, and getting Bull Connor out of office required a lot of movement and cooperation and manipulation by people like David Vann and by the Young Men's Business Club downtown, and people who strategized in ways to, I mean, essentially ended up having to change the system of government in order to get Bull Connor out of Birmingham, and it worked.
Surely that couldn't happen today.
Surely that couldn't happen again.
Election is an election.
We're going to have to change the form of government. But some people think that's going on already.
None of the horror of 4 little girls murdered, 40 homes and buildings bombed, or the other degradations and sins, none of that made it to the pulpits on Sundays or to the school books during the week. You learned that history after becoming an adult.
I did.
And in addition to the inspiration you received from Martin Luther King's letter, Harrison Salisbury had a profound effect. Will you share just a part of his work and give us context how that motivated you?
Yeah, Harrison Salisbury was a New York Times reporter who came down in 1960 and wrote a story. He talked to a lot of people, Birmingham Southern College professors, preachers, people in the community, politicians, and wrote a story that essentially, laid bare the struggles that were going on in Birmingham. It appeared under a headline, "Fear and Hatred Grip Birmingham," which, the Birmingham Chamber of Commerce disputed and hated and railed against and all that, but which focused the attention on Birmingham as part of this civil rights movement that really had not. It gave it the national sort of attention that it needed, and it was stark and it was poetic and it was damning, and I think it made a real difference, and really I think helped create the later movement, the Children's Crusade, bringing Martin Luther King to Birmingham in the first place, and it's because it's preceded that, but it was really important, and so I look at it as both a historic document and a beautiful piece of writing, and I can't really quote it all, but I could read a passage or two.
Would you please? A couple of passages. It was profound in the book.
Right. I'm just going to read a little bit here.
Would you please?
From Red Mountain, where a cast-iron Vulcan looks down 500 feet to the sprawling city, Birmingham seems veiled in the poisonous fumes of distant battles. On a fine April day, however, it is only the haze of acid fog belched from the stacks of the Tennessee Coal and Iron Company's Fairfield and Inslee works that lies over Birmingham. But more than a few citizens, both white and Negro, harbor growing fear that the hour will strike when the smoke of civil strife will mingle with that of the hearths and forges. Every channel of communication, every medium of mutual interest, every reasoned approach, every inch of middle ground has been fragmented by the emotional dynamite of racism, reinforced by the whip, the razor, the gun, the bomb, the torch, the club, the knife, the mob, the police, and many branches of the state's apparatus. In Birmingham, neither blacks nor whites talk freely. The pastor carefully closes the door before he speaks. A Negro keeps an eye on the sidewalk outside his house. A lawyer talks in the language of conspiracy. Telephones are tapped, or there is fear of tapping. Mail has been intercepted and opened. Sometimes it does not reach its destination. The eavesdropper, the informer, the spy have become the fact of life.
That is so powerful, and
it is
60 years ago.
60 years ago. And people did not want to believe it, just as they don't want to believe it now.
One of the reoccurring themes I gleaned out of the book is that silence is sinister. It was then, it is now. Would you share your thoughts on silence?
Yeah, that's really the genesis of the book, and the whole point is that if you we all have pulpits, right? You don't have to be a preacher or You don't have to be a politician. You don't have to be a news guy. You don't have to have a big pulpit. We all have pulpits, whether it's around our dinner tables or around the world. And when I started looking at these sermons and thinking about where they took us, I really began to question, if you have a pulpit and you don't use it, what good are you? And can you claim to be a good person? And I struggle with that throughout. And if you don't say the things that need to be said, the thing that you truly believe to make the world a better place, then I think that's a sin, if in the broader context of that word. So I really believe, and not to go on too long about it, but you can't go back in time and imagine what you would do there. You can't do that.
Of course not.
But all you can do is but you can go back in time and look at what was said and what wasn't said and how it was said and what was done, and use it in today. Use the knowledge of what was done there today to help you determine how you want to be and how you want to be remembered and what it and why it matters.
Well said and well written. We all recall Roosevelt's day that will live in infamy, the December 7th, 1941. Birmingham has its own day, September 15th, 1963. We've got the paragraph, on that day, at that time, you have your father's sermon. May we ask you to read just that part that you have in the book.
There's it strikes me as he was writing this sermon. It's really one of the first moments that he really said anything overtly about race, I think. It wasn't strongly overt. He usually used parable to talk about it, whether it was the Good Samaritan or something like this. So, but at this moment, and he couldn't have known that it had happened. He was preaching in his own pulpit, which would have been the same time the bomb went off at the church downtown and killed those 4 little girls. But there was a segment in there that said, as I look at the complex problems of life around us, I wonder if we're not missing the boat in our understanding of these things. Are we going to play around with our own little pettiness, prejudice, and pride until it is too late to understand the significant things that are happening in the world? And that's just a passing reference, a fleeting nod to prejudice and racism and those sorts of things, which is a step forward for him, but still a step short at that time. And what I've come to find out about that and everything else is there really was a sort of vast conspiracy of silence, as you referred to earlier, in the churches and the pulpits, and not just the Methodist Church, which my dad was Methodist, but in others, and I think that sort of marked a changing point, but it wasn't in time.
Whew. Heavy. Shaking the gates of hell will cause every reader to reflect and think deeply of their own actions and those of their family and the contradictions. This will be a good time for our audience to hear your dad's quote on heaven.
Well, he said it a lot. When my dad was close to death, really. I mean, he got old. He had several kinds of cancer and several illnesses, but he smiled throughout that stuff. And you'd ask him how he was doing, and inevitably he would say, Heaven's my home, but I ain't homesick.
What a great line. That also is one of the many lines that has stuck with me.
Well, good.
And finally, in that context of your dad and his death and the funeral, will you share with the audience how Barney came into your life and all the details?
Oh, I will. My dad died. His funeral was in Decatur, where he had served at First Methodist Church in Decatur, and his burial was here at Elmwood. So all my brothers and sisters had come home for the funeral, of course, and they were staying with me at my house here in Birmingham. And so every morning I take my dogs, or I did pre-pandemic, to the dog park. And I had 2 dogs.
You had to.
I had 2 dogs, which was plenty. It was enough. And I go to the dog park, and I'm the only one there with these dogs. And locked in the park was this emaciated little puppy with almost no hair at all. Looked more like a pig than a dog. He was so skinny and covered in bugs and things like that, but he was so friendly, and he went and got along with my dogs, and it was a very sweet dog. But I didn't want any part of this dog, but I had things on my mind. My dad's funeral. I had to get back for the funeral, so I tried to lock him back in the pen as I left. I normally would have called somebody, but I was in a hurry. But my dog scooted out of the gate as fast as he could, and he followed me home. I was trying to tell him not to do that. He went under a city bus at one point in time, and I was like, this is all I need. But he got home, and all of my brothers and sisters, bless their hearts, insisted that, this is the day of your dad's funeral, and this dog follows you home from the park. This is a sign. If it's not a sign from God, it's a sign from Daddy, and that's probably a bigger deal anyway. So, so I ended up. How can you not keep this dog? So I ended up keeping Barney, and Barney insists on sleeping right beside me every night. So he's a loyal. I wouldn't call him beautiful, but he's gained some weight since his early years, and he's cleaned up his act. But he's a good dog, and I still think I don't think it was a sign from God. I do believe it was a sign from Dad, and it was probably a practical joke too. But I'm stuck with Barney, and
what a beautiful, wonderful story. There were so many of the other kind in the book. John Archibald, you listed several heroes in your book who did stand up to power to do the right thing. You, sir, are a hero. For so many of us, for your unflinching reporting and writing.
Thank you.
This book is another giant step for all of us.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this incredible book, and thank you for signing all of our books.
My great pleasure.
You may purchase signed first editions of this incredible book by going to alabamabooksmith.com.